how many of you, and let's just put our guards down and let's just be honest with ourselves. How many of you deal with fear as a leader every day? Would you agree with that? Every single one of us. So would you agree that fear is not a weakness? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
It is not a weakness. Fear is an inevitable reality. The issue is, as a leader, are you going to address the fear or is it going to address you? You show me a leader who has no fear, and I'll show you a leader who has the potential very quickly to do some stupid things. Fear can be a healthy guide as long as it doesn't become a dominator. So let me talk to you about my own experiences with fear. These are my experiences. That does not mean they are your experiences. And as I'm talking about some of my story, I'm sure that you're going to be thinking about your story. And I'm going to share with you what are the keys that I have found dealing with debilitating fear. Because fear can debilitate a leader. Fear can kill a leader's potential and effectiveness. Coming from the self-messages that we give, we can be our own worst enemy with fear. Aside from unconditional love, fear is the number one motivator of leadership behavior. Dealing with fear is the number one motivator of leadership behavior. Now, I remember in 2007, 2008, in my field, even though when companies during the Great Recession were imploding inwardly, what often happened is the first thing that went aside was helping their people to deal with the issues. And so I remember in 2008, I lost $400,000 in signed contracts in one single day. Now, again, there were signed contracts. I could have gone after them legally, but I didn't. Because number one, they're my partners. Number two, all they were doing was transferring what had been done to them. And you cannot get blood out of a turnip. And so when you're a small business at that time, we were significantly smaller than we are now. I'll remember on that day, I'll never forget that day. I'm thinking, I've lost a significant portion of a year's income in one day. And I was so distraught. I remember I pulled out my garage. My mother had parked her car behind me in a place that she's never there. I ran her and just demolished her car. Got out, instead of saying, "Mom, I'm so sorry," I lit into her and gave her a new one. Because of I remember how absolutely terrified and a feeling of being completely out of control. Wondering, am I going to lose it all? Beginning to think about all the things that can go wrong and not about what? All the things that what? That can go right. And your thought processes become completely distorted. And you begin to already imagine moving from your home into a one-bedroom apartment with 14 other families. You just know it's going to happen. and you know you're going to lose it all. You're going to lose your savings. You're going to lose the lodge that we have up on the island that we use for executive retreats. We're going to lose our home. I mean, I was there. And yet I'm going around the country teaching people how to maintain self-control. Sometimes, gang, it's a lot easier to talk it than it is to do it. Would you agree with that? And then when we moved into this building, Number one, what we were told when we did our research to come here for Scottsdale, this is what is called in our field a leadership desert. And what that means is there is a very, very small number of high scalable organizations that can take on large organizations on multiple fronts and do multiple services at a high level. And we were told Green Bay in Northeast Wisconsin is one of those pockets that you guys could really take advantage of. But yet, I'd always been told that if you're not from Green Bay, you'll know you're not from Green Bay. And people didn't know us. I was leaving a practice in Scottsdale that had been built up for about 15 years. It was very successful, but I wanted to get off the plane. It was a lifestyle decision. And I remember Bob Atwell convincing me, you need to do this and we'll support you. And suddenly my mortgage payment went up by 1,500% in 1 month. And you're going, and you have tons of people saying, you put $2.5 million into this process. We don't do that in Green Bay. I can't tell you how many times we were told that we were going to fail. Don't think that there were times that little Freddie at 3 o'clock in the morning went to bed with an anthill and woke up with Mount Everest. Have you ever done that before? You've been there? You all, every one of us have those moments. And in those moments, we have a crisis of self-belief. We have a crisis of belief in ourselves. We often have a crisis of belief in God. We have a crisis of belief in other people. And what I want to share with you for the next few minutes, and then we're going to open it up, just honest conversation, because I guarantee you right now, there are people who are watching this, and there are people in this room who walked in here facing certain situations that, quite frankly, you're scared to death about. Why? Because every single one of us deal with that. Can you identify with that? Every single one of us. So I began to catalog down what are the things that I have found that work for me. Just because they work for me, you have to decide if they work for you. And I'm sure there may be other methods that you've used, but here are the ones that have worked for me. The first is when fear is rampant, your perspective can be completely out of line. And so the first is gaining perspective. Put things in perspective. And one of the questions that I use to put things in perspective is the question of what is the worst thing that could happen? What is the worst thing that could happen? And for me, the worst thing that could happen was losing my real estate. It was losing, but it wasn't about losing my talent. It wasn't about losing the ability to rebuild something. It wasn't about losing the ability to, it wasn't about losing trust with people, which is the essence of what we do. So I thought the worst that could happen is literally we end up putting a bunch of stuff in storage and moving into an apartment. Big deal. If you have your wife who loves you to death and you love her and you have your family, and if you have that, we can always find a way to make a living, you know, and so that was one. And part of the other perspective was, here's another fear that I deal with, is the fear of failure. Anybody here deal with that? Mm-hmm. So we move here, and what happened? I never knew that if you buy a building, you would be on the front page of the newspaper at least 7 different times. We literally got hundreds of thousands of free press from the Green Bay Press Gazette because people weren't investing at that point. And I'm going, I hope I didn't make a mistake, because they're making a really big deal out of this. And then you get the mayor and you get other people saying that he is the model for what we're going to be doing. And then we have an architect who decides to take a little inconspicuous sign and stick it up as the largest sign, commercial sign in downtown that says, "We're here." Don't think there were many nights that went, "Oh my gosh, what will people think when I blow it? What will people think if we have to close down business?" Isn't it crazy how it works? What will people think? What will be my legacy? So the first is getting it in perspective, you guys. As long as you have your life, as long as you have your family, as long as you have the critical people in your life, gang, we can all make a living. But that's what the essence is. I found myself giving too much power to people that were not in my box. So what? I filed for bankruptcy. So what? It doesn't matter. And quite frankly, those people that learn about my bankruptcy that I was certain that would happen, and it was crazy even to go there, never even came close. We always stayed in strong financial position, but I found myself, why am I giving so much power to what other people think? Why am I so worried about that? And I'll never forget what my dad taught me many years ago, that Fred, you cannot give that kind of worry about people who are not in your box. And that means those 4 or 5 people in your life that right now, if you can know, if you were to die in 30 years, you would know without a question that they would do everything possible and they would be at your funeral no matter what, because of the relationship. He said, those are the people that matter. Your family and those 3 or 4 other people in your life, pour yourself into them. And let them pour into you. So the first thing is gaining your perspective back. Gaining your perspective back. The second is putting people in perspective. Number one, what often happens, we're debilitated by fear. Do we talk about it or do we shut down? What do most of us do? We shut down. We're afraid to let people know that we're afraid, because people will see that as what? Weakness. Gang, it's not weakness. It's authenticity. It's being honest. It's being real. It's being human. It's saying out loud what everybody else is feeling. And so it's relying upon those people. And so what I have found is when it feels like everything is spinning, surround yourself and reach out to some wise people in your life. And ask them and be vulnerable with them. Look, this is how I'm feeling. This is what's going on. I need your advice. I need your perspective. Can you give me any wisdom? And gang, wise people will pour into you if you're willing to be vulnerable like that. When we first came here and when we were trying to get our footing, Terry was an incredible resource to us. And Terry, I really mean that. He would tell people around the community, you guys need to watch out for these folks. They're going to make a difference. And he would plow. He handled a couple of situations for us, and he was always here. And Terry, don't think I won't ever forget that. And I'm sincerely, when I saw you walking through that parking lot today, I went, yes, Terry's here. Another pathological person. And so, and the first is, do you go inward, or do you have the courage to reach out and say, I need help? The mark of a leader is not someone who has all the answers. The mark of a leader is someone who says, I don't have all the answers and I need you. That's a leader. And it's amazing if you're willing to do that, how people will get involved in your life and help you to come up with solutions that you don't even think about. Does that make sense? Can you guys relate to this? Or am I speaking to myself? Which I do quite often. So it's when you're getting people's perspective, it's not giving your power away to people and understanding that people can be your greatest resource that God can put into your life. And so the first one is gaining perspective. The second is beginning to be vulnerable and to rely upon the wisdom and the pain and the experiences of others who have walked through that journey. The third game is recommitting to your purpose. The third is recommitting to your purpose. Your purpose is the why of what you do. It is the where you are going. Less than 1% of leaders truly know unequivocally what their purpose is. Less than 1%. And make daily decisions against that purpose. And when you're in a fear-based place and you've got all kinds, your mind is spinning in a lot of different directions, I tell people at that moment, you have to focus on your locus of control. You've got to simplify it by going inside yourself and asking, what is my purpose? What are my values? What are the non-negotiable principles in my life? You have to simplify it because you can go 50 different directions at that moment. And it's your purpose, it's those non-negotiable values that will steady you during that time. Does that make sense? Sometimes all you have is your purpose. And sometimes that's all you need is your purpose. I can't tell you how many times that I've woken up after a bad day or a challenging month, or just like many of you, and you wonder, why am I doing this? Has anyone here ever asked that question? And gang, what keeps you going is you've got to reattach yourself to the why. And if it's a why that's linked to something shallow like money and getting the most toys, that's not going to go that's not going to go very far. But if it's a why that has to do with serving, being a service to other people, if it's a why that's about making a deep, lasting contribution through whatever you're doing in your profession to make lives of other people different, then let me tell you, that will get you through the storms. That will give you the motivation to plow through your fear. Make sense? Number 4. Am I on number 4? Thank you. Number 4 is plan. One of the most empowering things that you can do when you are feeling racked by fear is to begin to ask yourself, okay, I can sit here and act like a victim, or I can take responsibility for my solution. And I can choose that I am going to sit down and I am going to come up with a plan of what I can do that I can control in this situation. Taking responsibility is one of the most empowering things that you can do. And it is also a major stress reliever and fear killer. Most people, when they're afraid, just sit back and they're going, oh my gosh, the world's going to fall in. Effective leaders say they put it on the table. You have to, gang, the first basic thing I failed to say is you've got to address your fear first. You've got to acknowledge that I'm afraid, and it's under the table. How do you take the under the table fear and kill its power? By taking it under the table and what? Putting it on top of the table and say, guys, I just want to be honest with you, I'm afraid. Okay, and you know what the cool thing is? When you say that to your team, they're not going to go, what a moron. If they do, you've got the wrong team member. What will they do? Oh, I'm glad she said that because I feel the same way. Wow. And the irony is that kind of authenticity draws people to you. It doesn't repel you. Does that make sense? Now, I also need to say the last one, and this is for me, and you have to seek your own way. But I have found that prayer is critical for me in times of fear. I'll never forget that day in my living room, really believing in my mind that I was going to lose everything. We had lost so much percentage of income that the IRS came after us during that time because they thought that we were hiding money, because there was no way that you could have a 40% loss of income in 1 year. That was a wonderful moment. And guys, I'll never forget all that period. There was one time through that 1.5 year period that I remember, one time more than anything else. And it was when my wife Tracy and I got down on the couch and we surrendered. Hey, I can't do this by myself. This thing is beyond me. And I need your help. And I need your guidance. I'll never forget the sense of relief that came from that moment of letting it go and recognizing that there are forces far greater than you that can help you deal with your fear. You know, listen to the silence in this room right now. It's a deafening silence. Why? Why? Talk to me. It's your turn.
We've all been there.
We can relate.
Yeah. So tell me, what's it been like for you? How did you get through it? What advice would you give to each other and to me? Or what questions do you have? Yes, sir, Terry.
Well, I would say that you said something earlier on, putting things in perspective. I think we as all human beings, we tend to exaggerate things that run into us. And so a lot of times when something starts to go wrong and you have a fear about it, you really run excessively that way. So it's more important to be able to say, here as a leader, I need to put it in perspective. There's a worst case scenario that the world's going to end, but there's really a worst case scenario that says, okay, look, we might lose money this year, maybe we'll make it up the next year. You got to put it in perspective where you are, and then you use that fear to motivate you to turn around and say, okay, now how do I drive that bad thing up the line more and more to an opportunity? And I agree with you, bringing your people in and talking about, we have this opportunity, here's the problem. We have an opportunity. People, I mean, look at what's happened in the world at Houston and the floods and the hurricane and everything like that. What gets people more, if they think they can help you, people will fall all over trying to give you help.
That's right.
And if you come to your own people and say, look, we need some help doing this, that'll be the first reaction. Everybody will turn into trying to solve the problem instead of getting on it. And I'll shut up here, but the biggest thing, if you're the one there who's trying to keep things safe, hey, you're kind of the rock with the waves crashing around you. You've got to let everybody else feel that you have some confidence. Sometimes you got to be, maybe you're over, you may be thinking, I have no way of doing this, but you got to turn around and say, hey, we can work this out. We can make it happen. And people will feed off of that.
Self-belief is critical during times of fear. Self-belief is critical. Remember how I've taught you that the average leader, the average American leader, has a self-belief level of 2.7 from a scale of 0 to 10? At 2.7, when you've got fear going on, you give your power to fear. At 8, you own your fear. You bring people into the process. You don't get in front of your team and go, guys, I'm scared to death and I need help. I can't do it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the strength of saying, guys, I've got to tell you that I'm nervous too. I'm nervous too. And anybody who wouldn't be nervous in this situation, guys, you're not being honest. Now, given that, I also believe in this team. And I believe in my leadership. So gang, let's figure this thing out. And we're going to go, my dad used to say to me, I'll never forget, I failed a Greek test in advanced languages in graduate school. And I was 24 years old, already had my bachelor's. I was the second year into my master's. And I qualified for welfare in terms of the income level that I was at. I was working for Delta Airlines in Louisville in their airport, cleaning toilets for $4 an hour. God knew I had a humility problem, so he had a way of putting me in appropriate places. And you know, I'll never forget. You know, it was eating Spam sandwiches every single day. And macaroni and cheese and sleeping on a floor. And yet you kept, why am I doing this? And why am I doing this? Someday it's going to pay off. And I'll never forget that day when I failed that test. And you had those moments. You just went, just screw this. Go get a real job. And I called my dad and I said, Dad, who had been very supportive and had gone through the same route that I had 30 years prior, I'll never forget this great, deep sense of wisdom that he gave me. And let me share it with you. He said, Fred, I know you're scared to death, and I know you're tired. But Fred, I want you to remember this. Yard by yard, it's hard. But inch by inch, it's a cinch. He said, Fred, quit trying to navigate the yards and just focus on the next inch. And you'll get through it. I've shared that with a number of NFL football players. One of them called me in the middle of training camp this past week and said, hey, Dr. Fred, just want you to know, inch by inch, it's a cinch, I'm doing it. It's little things like that that we could grab onto. Little things. Who else? Yes, ma'am.
Hey there, good morning.
Hey.
I'm going to build up what Terry said this morning, and you have to be careful with self-talk. One of the things that I learned from a great leader was to treat yourself as if you were your best friend versus the things that you say to yourself can be really horrible compared to what you would say actually to a great friend. And so building off of what Terry said is self-talk can be huge. If I notice that there's little pitted things that I'm saying to myself or in my head, it's like, I got to stop and turn this around and talk to myself as if I'd be my best friend, because I would never say those things to another person.
That's huge. Great advice. Who else? Yes, ma'am.
Terry said something interesting that I picked up right away with things slam into you. And I think it's real important to recognize that you don't get guilty. Many things happen that you didn't intend to have happen, that you didn't create. And so it's so important that you don't start carrying around guilt like it's all my fault. Because yes, there will be things that are your fault, and we deal with that. But so often the things that you're scared of are things that slam into you. And I think it's important you don't riddle yourself with guilt on top of everything.
Yeah. We've started a military division here to help soldiers and officers transition off the battlefield. And in the last month, we've been fortunate that the gentleman who has trained every Navy SEAL for the last 14 years has now joined our team. And he is helping us build this transition program. And yesterday we were talking about this very subject. And he said to me, Fred, let me tell you what we say in the SEALs. Because we know that life is going to be tough. And we know that what we're being asked to do is going to be scary. No question. And he made this comment, and I'll warn you, it sounds a little crass. He said, embrace the suck. I said, what? He said, embrace the suck. You know it's going to suck. You know that you're about to go into muddy crap. You know this is not going to be comfortable. You know it's not going to be easy. However, you're a leader, you've been given gifts, you've got abilities, get after it and let's go. Embrace this thing and let's go. And he said, I can't tell you how many times when I was being asked to do something that sounded nearly physically and emotionally impossible. It was that saying, inch by inch, it's a cinch. Embrace the suck, it's the self-talk. It's not going to be easy, but we can do this. Get after it. Hey, gang, some of you are dealing with some stuff right now. Get after it. You can deal with this. It's uncomfortable, but leaders learn how to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's part of the burden and the blessing of leadership. I want to ask you a question. How many of us have been in networking things like this and it was all just real shallow surface stuff? Yeah, I didn't want to do that with you all today. Listen, I wanted to give you some fuel. I wanted to give you some fuel by just being real. You know, how many times when our life feels like we can't take one more ounce of stress and someone walks up to us and says, hey, how you doing? And we go, oh, everything's great. Oh, we're growing. Oh, man, we had the best year that we've ever had. And inside you're going, oh, my gosh. You feel like a fraud because, quite frankly, at that moment you are. It's okay to say, you know, right now I've got some challenges, to be honest with you. But I'm also confident that we will work through it. Just being able to own it with yourself is part of the process of working with fear. Make sense? Joe?
When you brought that up about the uncomfortable and the growth process and the perspective is like, like backing into your mom's car and things being really bad. And it's like looking at it it's like busting loose from the money game. He calls it the Easter egg moment. Like when all of a sudden you have the awareness that things are really ugly right now, or you're in that uncomfortable moment of growth. It's that perspective that you shift and choose to move forward, which was interesting then when you brought it up to the purpose, because it's like I thought of it when I was reading that book, like the He-Man moment or the She-Ra moment. Like you get to pull out your own sword and be like, I have the power. And then you get to take your fears, like acknowledging them, acknowledging the crap that's happening. Like it's not shunning it or not paying attention to it, but it's acknowledging it. And then choosing that purpose and that vision and those intentions, and then like shifting that energy for like how you're thinking, from being in this poor me situation to like this is happening for me situation.
Yeah. I had a friend who likened fearful moments to a storm. And he said, he taught me to say it this way. He said, look, when you're in the midst of fear and it feels like there's a storm all around you, whether it's in your business, whether it's in your family, whatever it is, he said, just look at it that there are going to be waves. And in a storm, to expect in a fearful time that there are not going to be moments of surprise. There are not going to be moments that you got information that you would prefer not to have. There are not going to be moments that you wish you didn't have to wade into that situation. Just understand that you go through it, you let it happen, and you deal with it because that's just the wave. But the waves are not infinite. The waves are finite. And he taught me, look at that moment as a wave. It's just a wave, and I'm going to go through it. But that means I'm just one more wave to the back of the storm. I'm just one more wave. At the front of the storm, initially, the waves keep coming, and they keep coming, and they keep coming. And they're tall. It's just a wave. But you know what? This is one wave I'm working through to the back of the storm. And pretty soon, those waves will begin to slow down. And now it's only one day out of 7 that you have a bad day. And then it's once every 2 weeks. And then it's listening to a song on the radio that triggers something. And it gets less and less. Oh, by the way, let me encourage you. Then another storm comes. That's life, isn't it? And it's how you process through it. Yes, sir. And then Mitch.
There's just one other piece here. And, you could see it in your talk. there's nothing greater when you're a leader than overcoming a problem where you had the fear and solving it and going forward.
That's right.
And that's what we all, it kind of motivates us going forward.
That's right.
So if you start looking at it that way, it's, hey, here's the problem, but boy, once we solve it, isn't it good?
That's a great comment. Trust, when you're in fear, trust the patterns of the past. Trust the patterns of the past. If you succeeded in the past, you're still the same smart person you were back then. You still got the same energy. You still got the same drive. You're going to figure it out. Trust the patterns of the past. And if there's a new pattern, such as the Great Recession, we're going to figure it out. Make sense? Mitch, my friend.
Yeah, a couple of things, sticking with the water theme. Warren Buffett's got a great line. He says, you can tell who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. And his whole comment is leadership teams get exposed during tough times.
Yeah.
And, it's an opportunity then to look at how can I make this team better during tough times. But, as you're talking, Fred, we have a saying in our house that we try to get at the negative self-talk, and that is, don't give anybody free rent in your head.
Wow.
And that's kind of a regular thing. I've got a couple young kids or early 20s, and there are times when they show up at your door and you just say, hey, no free rent in your head, and they instantly, it's like snap out of it.
Yeah.
And
Great line.
because I know I regularly give people free rent. It's easy to say and fun to say, it's hard to do.
Great line. Great. Yes, my friend Pat.
So Fred, one of the things you said before was, some of us are really good at saying it, not doing it.
Yeah.
You shared some of that.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah.
But one of the things just that I've just really learned is the more you get outside yourself, right? Yeah. The less you have to be that rock, or the less negative self-talk you have.
That's right.
When you're focused on everybody else around you, that's when you're going forward. That's where you don't have to have all the solutions.
That's right. I was dealing with a kid from the Pittsburgh Steelers just last week on the line, and he lost most of his money through poor spending. It was a classic habit, and here he was bankrupt 2 years after being out of the league, and he was in the league for 7 years, so he made quite a bit of money, and he owned it. But yet he was dealing with this message system that says, I've got to be the rock. That was literally his message system. I've got to be the rock. I've always been the provider for my homies. I've always been the provider for my family. I've got to be the rock. And, he got on the line. I started probing him. It's just a gift. It's just started probing. And hey, everything's good. And I could tell, come on, feed me a line. I just kept probing. You know how that goes, Troy. And eventually he just started crying. And he said, I'm supposed to be the rock. And he started crying like a baby. And I called him by name and I said, look at how much energy that you are spending on telling yourself you're supposed to be a rock, instead of letting go of that burden and starting to deal with your issue by acknowledging you're not a rock. And it's okay. Let's start again. Okay. Put your image down. It's just an image.
Yeah, that's the get outside yourself. One of the big psychologists, I can't remember who it was in the 20th century, said, somebody asked him, what would you tell somebody if they're anxious or depressed or feeling caught up? He said, just go out and help somebody.
Oh my gosh, it's
right?
huge.
Because then you get outside yourself.
That's right. It's huge. A favorite question that I ask the folks that we work with is this. When you're in a moment of indecision, ask yourself, if you weren't afraid, what would you do? If you weren't afraid, what would you do? And trust your gut instinct at that moment. Yes, sir. Troy.
I
my
think just
friend.
to add to the discussion about getting outside of yourself and then free rent, I find that leadership fears often come from lies I've believed about myself. And so I have to first address those. That's where those fears come from. And however we grew up and we adopted some lies. And I think understanding then where those come from, then it's easier to get outside of myself. And then one of the things we keep trying to do is to differentiate between desires and goals. I think fear often comes when we try to make something that can be a desire but we can't control a goal.
Yeah.
You know, if Trish and I are trying to hope our kids are going to do this, that's a desire. But if we make it our goal, it becomes something we're afraid of, it creates anxiety. So I think for planning to get out of fear, it's I think really healthy to differentiate between the things that you can control and you can't.
Great piece of advice. I just knew you opened up the discussion. There are so many wise people in this room. You know, Tony, we've been helping you and your firm lately, and I'm watching you, and I'm just watching your head go like this. What are you thinking?
Well, fear is something that in growing up is really the biggest motivator, and it was for me, whether it's in sports or in school and all of those things, and I didn't realize it. And it always motivated the fear of losing, the fear of failure, and that continues in your work life. And eventually you label it, and I've learned through your process, which has been wonderful, to label it.
Would you say that out loud, please?
Yeah. But
Turn around and look at the camera.
But, you know, in labeling it and understanding it and acknowledging it, and then ultimately leadership isn't what it used to be. It isn't what I was taught, whether it was a coach or boss or all of those people that have been your mentor and leader and so forth. So in becoming, you know, allowing yourself to be more vulnerable and not being guilty and all of those sorts of things really is truly what allows people to know that you're authentic and being authentic. So,
and it lightens your burden. It just lightens your burden. So you know, you all, thank you for allowing me to be real with you. When you get real, there's a fear. Someone's going to judge me. Someone's going to make a conclusion, and they will. So what? So what? Be true to yourself. Know your purpose. Be authentic. Be real. And remember this silly little line. Inch by inch. Let me do that one again. Yard by yard. It's hard, but what? Inch by inch. It's a cinch. I want to thank all of you for being here. I hope that we've given you some value today. This has been recorded on Facebook Live. If you, let me make a shameless plug. If you know of someone that this would be a gift to for them, share it on Facebook, okay? We just want to pour into people's lives. And thanks for all those folks that are online for joining us. You guys are awesome. Let's give ourselves a hand.